Hello, I'm Ronnie Eldridge. Welcome to Eldridge and Company. The subject is Ashcroft and Friends versus George Washington and the Framers. The book is Fighting Words, a toolkit for combating the religious right. The author is Robin Morgan, legendary writer, feminist, political thinker who continues to inspire and exhort. And welcome.
I'm so glad to be
Thank
here.
you.
And thank you so much. Look who's talking about
please.
inspiring and exhort.
We have so much to talk about.
Yes.
But I want to talk about the book first.
Okay.
I had just really watched President Bush give
sorry.
his speech. This program, you know, is really biased. I have to admit to all of my viewers and everything that I have an opinion and a viewpoint, and I like to reflect it with my guests. I don't like to argue with people.
Bias for the truth is always a good thing.
Okay. So he finishes his speech, and what does he say? God bless America, or something like that. And it's always driven me crazy. And then all of a sudden, I read the review for Fighting Words, and I was thrilled about it because you have been moved to try to bring back to us, I guess, the realization that this is a country not necessarily under God.
Very decidedly not under God.
So tell us about the book and why you wrote it.
I like you, I got tired of talking back to my television set. That's not true. So many of us, you know, the majority of Americans, in fact, still have their hearts in the right places, and more every day as the lies and the deceits of this administration,
we hope,
become clearer. We hope, and the polls seem to show that. But in conversations, you still find that there is this myth that it's a Christian country, that, you know, certainly the religious right propagates these myths all over the places. I mean, you know, Falwell and company are always saying it's a Christian country, and the framers thought, and the founders wanted, and you're being unpatriotic if you are an atheist, or even if you're a person of strong religious faith who believes in separation of church and state, you're also unpatriotic, you know. And so this was making me, like you and many people, very cranky, and I realized that very few people, sadly, too few, read those wonderful new, over the past 4 or 5 years, 600-page biographies of the framers that have come out, and they're amazing, but they're not getting read in the heartland, they're not getting read by young folks, they're not, you know, they're just... Right. So I thought, okay, we live in an age of sound bites and factoids, and what we need is verbal karate for arguing. Because in fact, the framers, far from being devout Christians, were this wonderful hodgepodge of atheists, agnostics, Christians, free thinkers, Masons, which was its whole other thing in itself. And they were radicals, granted. I mean, it's important to stop and meditate on this for a second. Some of them held slaves. Some of them, on the other hand, like Franklin, founded the first anti-slavery
When we talk about the framers, we're talking about the people who wrote the Declaration of Independence
Precisely.
And the Constitution.
The framers
and
of the
Bill of Rights.
Yeah, everything. That's right. The founders of the country.
Right.
Somehow it just seems very limiting to call them the fathers. You know, and as a feminist,
you can't do that.
Not so much. But they were, in fact, the framers of the Constitution, the founders of the country. And so on, you know, definitely imperfect men, not so happy about the positions on slavery, although they differed on that. Not so happy about the positions on women, whom they did not even have on their radar screens, not to come to think of it, that they had radar screens. But on this subject, on the subject of separation of church and state, and the necessary requirement for a healthy republic to be secular and not be involved with religion, they were, in fact, radicals. They were revolutionaries. They were fleeing religious persecution. Right. They were fleeing a situation where, don't forget, George III was not only the head of the state, but the head of the church. And their quotes are amazing on this, but Americans don't know this. I mean, we suffer an American educational system, and the media has not been doing its job. So this is, I did Fighting Words so we could brandish something and say, actually, Jefferson really said. And the quotes are amazing. They're not even, you know, you don't even have to argue intent. Jefferson said, question boldly the existence of God. Tom Paine, we know, was a radical. But when you look at the others, for example, Jefferson's copious writings are amazing. He was the author of the Virginia Act of Religious Freedom, on which the First Amendment is in fact based. He said flat out in a letter, and everything is sourced so that you can talk back to your your right-wing friend or your great-grandmother or your whoever, and say no, actually, and it comes from this letter on this date, that this is not nor ever has been a Christian country. Jefferson even took an edition of the New Testament and cut it up and took out all the parts about supernatural and miracles and angels and afterlife, because he said if there was a historical Jesus Christ, he was an interesting and wonderful philosopher, and that we should look at like we would look at Socrates. Right. The rest is all as idiotic as Minerva coming from the brain of Zeus. This is Jefferson. Washington initiated the Treaty of Tripoli, which states flat out, we are not a Christian nation.
What's
it was a treaty with Tripoli, which was a Muslim country. It is spelled Musulman in the 18th century. Yeah, that's right. And it was to reassure.
This was after the Constitution had been adopted.
Washington was our president. Right. He initiated the treaty. Adams, who followed him, signed it into law. We are not a Christian country. The first draft, there is no mention of a deity per se in the Constitution, and that's not by coincidence. The mention of endowed by their creator in the Declaration was inserted in the second draft. It wasn't even there in Jefferson's first draft. James Madison believed that there should be no chaplains in Congress. That violated the Constitution. Washington believed there should be no chaplains in the armed forces because they were divisive. Patrick Henry and Hamilton, both of whom were much more religionists. Yeah. Patrick Henry wanted basically a theological state. He wanted a theocracy. They both accused the other framers, in particular Jefferson and Adams, of, quote, Hamilton wrote this, quote, "You are trying to found an atheist republic on the ruins of Christianity," unquote. And Adams, who was always the diplomat, and who was a man of faith but strong secularist, sort of said, "Oh, well, no, I wouldn't quite put it that way." And Jefferson said, "Duh, yeah."
That's exactly.
And and then it goes on and on. I mean, I've included a section on other U.S. presidents. Lincoln, in his first two drafts of the Emancipation Proclamation and the Gettysburg Address, made no mention of God. This was inserted under pressure. So whether it's coinage, in God we trust, getting on our coinage.
And that was so interesting, because that's not forever. That only started recently.
It started in the McCarthyite 1950s, and yet the right claims proof that we're Christian and that we're a devout nation is that our motto, "In God We Trust," comes back from the beginning, and our coinage. It doesn't. The framers chose only the motto. They even argued about this because Hamilton and Patrick Henry wanted God in the motto, and the secularists won. The motto is simply "E pluribus unum," from many one. This came in the 1950s as a way to counter, quote, godless communism.
And when I see, so all of our, well, let's start for a minute. The under God and the Pledge of Allegiance. When did that come
Same
in?
period.
Same period. Because I remember learning it without under God.
I do too. I knew it.
And I never say under God.
That's right. It was written the pledge was written after the Civil War by a minister who was a socialist and who was so radical in his sermons and so compassionate to the poor that he lost his parish, and he wrote the pledge to unite the nation.
Everybody.
That's why it's all about one nation, indivisible. It had no under God.
Well, and the reason, so Patrick Henry and Hamilton, were they the leaders of the?
There were a number of others, but yes, in Virginia, Patrick Henry was definitely.
Was it a heated debate?
It was a heated debate, and rationality won the day.
Well, because also many of the people who were in the colonies and who were these founders were people who came to escape religious persecution.
Precisely.
So that's why they were determined then not to have it.
And I think that the let's have a theocracy boys were fewer and were very, very, very locked into a particular kind of devoutness, and it was the ruling class religion. It was Episcopalian. Everybody else, interestingly enough, from the evangelicals of the day, the Baptists, the poorer folk, it was a class issue as well, combined with a lot of serious religious, people of faith, as well as folks like Jefferson, who basically said, I'm a sect by myself, so far as I know. There's a quote of Adams about the cross that is absolutely amazing. I don't want to misstate it, so I will actually read it, but it's like, the radicalism is quite astonishing. It's, where is it, Adams? It's basically that, what an engine of grief. I hardly know, I almost shudder at the thought of alluding to the most fatal example of the abuses of grief which the history of mankind has preserved, the cross. Consider what calamities that engine of grief has produced. This is Adams writing to Jefferson. Now, there's no way to say, oh, but their intent was really to have a religious constitution. Their intent was very clear.
So do we then trace the move towards religion, mixing it up? What do we trace it to?
There have been three, this is now the third major religious revival, per se, if you want to call it that, in the United States. And they seem always to have come historically at a time of great change. One came right after the Civil War, for example. When people are scared, today the changes, whether it's the internet, whether it's the fear of terrorism, whether it's that their children are living different lives than our, that's threatened, the fake romanticism about the 1950s and how great things were. They were horrible. I was a kid growing up in the 1950s, awful, deadly. All of that makes people scared, and I think that genuine people of faith are, we're all on edge, and genuine people of faith have been sold a line by extremely cynical, manipulative, political leaders, all the way from, Ralph Reed and Falwell and James Dobson, straight on up to the man they put in the White House, and that they claim as their own. That the answer to this is God, because then the government doesn't have to step up to it. Then we're not responsible for our own morality, our own ethics. You can sort of, when in doubt, blame God. God, the same folks who will say, well, it was a sign from God that Katrina, the hurricane,
who said that?
Washed. I think it was Falwell. Falwell keeps coming out with things.
Ellen DeGeneres. And
Ellen DeGeneres' fault for existing and hosting the Emmy show, because she's in New Orleans originally. So this was why God did it. But other ministers from the extreme right said, how great is this? God sent Katrina to purge New Orleans of gay people and abortionists. Now that is, that seems to me, and I'm not a Christian, but it seems to me a very un-Christian way of going about it.
My favorite quote was just on your first page about Orrin Hatch.
Oh, yeah, read it.
Capital punishment is our society's recognition of the sanctity of human life.
Yeah, it's like, oh, huh? Huh? It's like a reversal of everything. I mean, I put in a whole section of just short, pithy quotes from their side. And friends ask me, why? We hear enough, from the religious right. But some of them are so far out, and we don't hear them. And some of them are just so plain funny, like Ma Ferguson when she was elected or selected to be governor of Texas, and they were trying to get a law that said some Spanish could be taught, and she nixed that, and she waved the Bible, and she said, if English was good enough for Jesus, it's good enough for Texas. So, and then I have a whole section of just other quotes on spirituality, genuine spirituality versus religion from other great Americans.
That's so great. And then you have a section on the law.
Yes, I do.
The myth that the United States is based on the Ten Commandments.
That's right. The Decalogue.
Who says that?
Oh, well, I mean, everybody is, all of them are going around saying that. And there's a great quote, again, from Jefferson. Jefferson was a hottie. I got to tell you, the other framers were amazing, but Jefferson was right out there on the very edge. On the edge. Probably because he was being told all this by Sally Hemings. Maybe she
That's just a feminist point of view. I have to say that's biased.
I know. But he goes into great length pointing out that even then they were claiming our law is based on British common law, which is based on the Decalogue or the Ten Commandments. They actually are the 10 words, so the proper name of them is the Decalogue, which properly, I think, deflates them from being commandments. So he pointed out in a long letter, which I excerpt, that as a student of jurisprudence, he was quite brilliant, that British common law is based on Saxon law, and Saxon law predates the coming of Christianity to Britain. So common law in Britain is not, in fact, based on Christianity. There are only two commandments, that you shouldn't kill and you shouldn't steal, that even overlap. And those are even further back in the Code of Hammurabi. People realized pretty early on, not a good idea to kill each other.
Now, then you have the actual Declaration of Independence, the actual Constitution,
the documents,
actual amendments.
That's right. The real thing, the real documents at the back.
Now, let's explore what the impact of bringing religion into the government has meant to us, or means to us now.
You know, well, it's huge. And yes, of course, you and I are both proud to be feminists, the F word, but that's not the only impact. I raise it because women are the canaries in the mine. You know, what attacks us first usually then spreads out to the rest of the society. So 15 years ago, when abortion clinics were being bombed and providers began to be shot to death, we said, excuse me, this is really bad. I mean, the Army of God was taking credit, and they were always ultra-rightist terrorists, basically. And I remember having conversations with legislators who said, yeah, but that's just women, but that's an incendiary issue, but that's just...
let's talk about something.
That's right. And, you know, if they come for us at night and you do nothing, they will come for you in the morning. It's the old thing. So it has now spread to a point where Mark Twain is considered, you know, anathema by some school boards. Some of his quotes in here, by the way, are pretty incredible. The God of the Old Testament, he said, is a feckless thug.
Oh boy!
And there's some wonderful quotes from Anthony and Stanton, sort of lovely ones from suffragists, saying, I realize that I'm a nicer person than the Old Testament God is. I mean, in other words, all that vengefulness. But in any event, the effect is now on our education. It's on our science. In the introduction, I talk.
And creation,
we are falling behind. We used to lead the world in scientific exploration, whether it was medical, stem cell, or whether in any field. We are now falling way behind. This year, for the first time in 36 years, the government has retrenched from giving to the National Institutes of Health way back. It affects everything from
giving public money to faith-based organizations,
which is literally illegal in the Constitution. I mean, if you can imagine,
in the White House.
That's right. You can imagine if the framers were alive and they saw faith-based initiatives in the White House, they would have apoplexy. So everything from education to science to our foreign relations with the world, because if we pose ourselves as us and them, then you've got the Crusades Muslim, all over again.
It's terrible.
What happens to the economy is disastrous, and it's not unrelated, because the more money that is poured into faith-based initiatives, the less goes out to unorganized folks, whether they are secular or religious. So you have a rising divide, and then what happens when we complain? They say, well, the poor have always been with us. God will provide. I mean, it's a very convenient afterlife pie in the sky.
The whole question of gay rights,
all of the bodily integrity issues, disabled people's rights, reproductive rights, because they're really after contraception as well. I mean, let's be honest about it. They're not just after abortion, and certainly same-sex rights. It is across the board now, for everything from our foreign policy to stem cell research. I mean, to science.
It's incredible. One of the most recent, I mean, I don't know if it's the most recent speeches about separation of church and state was John Kennedy's speech. And that's not so recent, is it? It was 50 years ago. No. When he was running for president as a Roman Catholic.
That's right, and that was a first. Yeah. And I remember people worrying in editorial pages all across the country. Well, if push came to shove, is he going to follow the Pope, or are he going to follow the Constitution?
Which was a question that really should have been asked, it seems to me, during the Supreme Court hearings recently.
Absolutely.
With the candidates that were before the Senate.
And Ronnie, I still possibly naively, but I will do this to my dying day. I'll say, but I believe that the people, and then I'll croak. But I still believe if people have information is power, you know?
Yeah.
So what I did with Fighting Words was to do everything in short, soundbite, quotable, you know, where you say, hey, listen to this, and then follow it with a section on
the different
resources
right.
and on resources.
It's so great.
Groups you can join, websites you can visit, you know, because there's much more. I just didn't want to do a big, thick book. I wanted it to fit.
This followed a novel that you wrote recently.
Yes, I may have to disappear in a red curly wig from 2 in 1 year about overwhelmed religion. The Burning Time came out in the spring, and then this in the fall. In a sense, one is the nonfiction version of the other, because they both are defenses against religious intolerance. The Burning Time is a historical novel based on a particular woman who fought back against the Inquisition, and it just was juicy fun for me. I researched it, and then I put in horses and torches and and made up wonderful things. But it is based on a real case. That came out in the spring, and then Fighting Words now.
Now, how did you get to be this activist, social theorist, and whatever you are?
Well,
everything?
right back
Tell
at
me.
you. I mean, I could, you know, I mean, because women try to do everything.
Yeah.
That's like number one. And I started out in the civil rights movement and the anti-Vietnam War movement, and then was
struck with the sexism
and
of
then,
the civil rights movement.
Yes,
right?
that was a radicalizing experience
Right.
when my leftist brothers, you know, turned on women, and so it was the birth of this wave, which I refuse to call the second wave or the third wave or any of those waves. I think we're a tsunami, you know, and we keep on keeping on. So I was active in feminism. Well, Sisterhood is Powerful came out in 1970, and that
was the
I haven't had a
anthology.
chance to
Wonderful.
wash my hair since. And now 20 some odd books later, this is the first time I don't think, between you and me and the many people listening, I don't think I've quoted this many men since I was like 15, but they're good quotes. And the one I would leave you with, in fact, is a wonderful one of Franklin's. When he came out of the Constitutional Convention, he was asked, "What form of government did you give us?" You know, I mean, because there were many possibilities and so forth. And he said, "We have given you a republic, if you can keep it." So I'm asking, can we keep it?
You travel and
Yes,
talk on campuses and to different organizations. Do you see younger people coming up that are interested in are going to do something about this world?
Wonderfully so, wonderfully so. There's been a lot of disproportionate press attention in this country on fake young feminists, you know, the ones who are saying, I can be a stripper, so therefore I am empowered, you know.
Yeah.
But that seems sexy. It seems to get headlines. They've been doing that for sort of years and years and years. The misfocus of attention. The younger women that I listen to and speak with and learn from and work with are just amazing. I mean, and they're passionate and they're smart. Their expectations are higher than ours were, which is exactly what we wanted. The kind of things just even to articulate that used to make my palms sweat and my mouth go dry and they take for granted and want to push it on from there. And internationally, the divide,
we haven't talked about your work internationally.
Well, internationally, there is no youth age divide.
Right.
I mean, what women are doing, I think, seriously, no hyperbole, can save the world.
Right. Yeah. The younger women, I have several questions. One is, you were once an actress.
I was.
Which also makes your appearances animated and your discussion very interesting.
Even
right?
more so when I've had some sleep. I was a kid actor, yeah.
Yeah, and so that's always been helpful, isn't it, when you want to deliver your message?
Now it is.
Yeah.
When I was in my early 20s and late teens and early 20s, I was fleeing from it and trying to be a serious writer and so that I triaged the skills. It took me until the women's movement really taught me that you can use those are good skills, and you can use them whether you're doing a poetry reading or doing a speech for not to speak somebody else's words, but to speak words that matter to you, a cause that you care about.
The question that politically that people are talking about is Hillary Clinton running for president. Now, you're an activist and you are a progressive and you have definite feelings about the world and peace and reconciliation, all that. What happens if Hillary Clinton becomes a candidate for president?
Well, it will, it will also depend a lot on who is running against her, and much depends on the elections coming this fall. I mean, the midterms. Much, because I think we can send a message right then and there. I think that she's very smart and very good on most of the issues. I think her position on the war has been wrong, and that's very seriously wrong. It must be its own kind of fresh hell to be making history, which she had, as the first lady to become a senator in honor. History will look back and say, "Wow," and we've already blinked and moved on. So I don't think that she, some feminists are understandably disappointed she hasn't taken more radical positions. She's not the president of the feminist movement. She's running for the most powerful office in the world. I remember when Albright became the first Secretary of State, and I knew some feminists who said, "Why doesn't she this and why doesn't she that?" And I remember thinking, grow the hell up. She's Secretary of State. In private, however, she will say to us, "I'm going to try this and this and this and this." But if you say it, I'll deny it. So it takes not just a village; it takes a movement to hold their feet to the fire. I would love to see the first woman president of this country. I never was so naive as to think it would be somebody like Bella Abzug or like you. I would love that, but the first one is always going to be much more. In fact, she's way to the left of Thatcher. That was the first there. Usually the icebreaker is one that the boys approve of.
That's true. Well, our half hour is over, so I can't believe it. But
it always goes so quickly.
We'll have to come back and talk more about politics and stuff. But people should read this book because it is a wonderful book. It's handy, and it's a great briefing statement for you.
They can go to my website, which is www.robinmorgan.us, and find out more about it and find out how to link to buying it cheaper.
And they also can look at the other books.
They can too.
Good. Thank you very much, Robin Morgan.
Thank you.
If there are any people you'd like to hear and topics you'd like us to explore, please let me know. You can write to me at CUNY TV, 365 Fifth Avenue, New York, New York, 10016, or you can go to the website at cuny.tv and click on Contact Us. I look forward to hearing from you.